Hey, good morning. I'm making a video because I am not going to be in class tomorrow on Tuesday. And so your assignment's going to be for class discussion. You're going to view this video and mark it as done. So I'm going to put this as an assignment in Google Classroom. I had several students ask about, their unit test, and so I'm going to kind of review a couple of the things. This is the unit test review. Um, One, it's going to have some of the answers, but it's not simply just marking the right answers. I want you to kind of see why the correct answer is what it is. I'm going to kind of just go to the question and connect that back to the answer. So they give you on number one, they give you this situation about observing flowers and bees, and they ask which statement best describes the data. Well, the issue is they only observed it for 5 days, and so the correct answer would be observing it longer. So some of these questions are going to ask you to evaluate how someone's doing an experiment, and it needs you to kind of see where improvements can be made. In question two, it's asking what is the best way to display data for analysis. And it's wanting you to understand that to make this into a graph, you're going to use the x-axis um, for the first column, and then you're going to use the second column for plant height. So it's more about just understanding how to make a graph from a data table. Number three is asking you why these two students, we have Jake's graph and Aisha's graph. Why did they come to different conclusions? And you have to look very closely at the graph here. They're actually using the same numbers, but they're using a different range for their y-axis. And so it's just kind of getting you to think. It's not looking just at the picture, but looking at the range and everything about the graph. Question four is a scatter plot, which is kind of like a graph. And it's supposed to show you the population of rabbits over time. So here's the population, here's the time, and it's asking you which one would show a population that's growing and then starts getting affected by predation, meaning the graph increases and then goes down, and then that's why it's C. We see an increase and then predation starts and it starts going down in their population. Question five. It's wanting to know what tools would be used. And so if I'm going to look at temperature, I have to be using a thermometer. And if I'm looking at amount of growth and I'm going to measure that, that's why it'd be a balance. And that's the third option there. Density is mass per volume. The lab instruments used to measure the density of seawater would be a balance and a beaker. What's the best? What equipment is best to hold and measure liquids? It's a flask and graduated cylinder. Number 8 is asking about which statement describes a logical inference or what you can gather from the data. And it all goes back to what they eat. Joyce avoids eating dairy and animal products. Linda eats rich foods, bacon, eggs, and buttered toast. All of those have a high amount of saturated fat, so she would have more bad cholesterol. Number 9 is asking which generalization can be made from the data from this table. So we see temperature and average time of chirps in crickets. And so what you're looking for is you're looking for some connection, and the connection is as temperature increases, the chirps get closer and closer in time, meaning the time goes down between chirps. Question 10. We have a student that's conducting an experiment to see whether talking to plants will help them grow faster. And they ask, here's the setup, group 1 and group 2. And it's asking about the best conclusion. And this is a question about controls. If you hand water one group and water with a sprinkler the second group, you're not keeping that variable the same. So it's B, they did not control the variables, and so the data is not valid. Question 11 is asking which statement best describes the work of these researchers. So you have to kind of look at this a little bit. They develop software, so forth, and that's where we're getting this researchers apply creativity. Question 12, what would most likely be included in the analysis section of a lab report? So analysis means you're looking at your data and trying to determine what it means. And so that's why it's a discussion of any errors and experimental data. A list of supplies is more in your procedures. Suggestions would be more in conclusion and follow-up, and a description of the variables is also in the setup of the experiment. The independent variable is the only factor that scientists change. Independent variable is the one that we change or varies. A dependent variable would be the one that's measured. So that's kind of the difference there. Something that we keep the same or constant is a control. Okay, question 14. An experiment is performed to test the effect of 3 different types of water on the growth of a plant. Choose a statement below that describes the tap water in this experiment. All right, so the test was done with tap water, distilled, and carbonated water. So it's asking about the tap water. So the tap water is one of the 3 test conditions, meaning tap water, distilled water, carbonated water. Question 15 is asking you what must be done for the researcher to accurately measure the dependent variable. So it's looking at, finds that white bread contains more preservatives. She designs and tests an experiment on the type of bread. So if you're thinking that the white bread contains more preservatives, she would have to have a way to measure. Okay, measure, the dependent variable. Question 16, to test the effectiveness of a new nutrient supplement, okay, which is the most complete list of parts of the experiment presented in the scenario. Okay, so it's just asking you how we would set up an experiment. Doesn't really matter what the experiment is, but you need something that you change, the independent variable, and then your control and experimental group. The control group isn't changed, and the experimental group is what would see the different types of nutrients from the independent variable. Okay, so all theories are hypotheses. This is question 17, but not all hypotheses are theories. So Francis wants to know if a specific hypothesis is a theory. So how would he figure that out? And so you would have to do repeated experiments. Okay, that's how something becomes a theory. It gets repeated over and over and over again. Question 18, look at the statement below. Fish meal is better than artificial fertilizers. How could this statement be revised to make it a hypothesis? Okay, so it has to be something that says that it's going to be better. So plants that are fertilized with fish meal will grow taller than plants that don't. That's why that's the better statement. It's not about safer. It's not about whether it's natural. And artificial, it's not about Will they be better? Better how? So we have to see something that we can measure. Question 19. Why have improvements in microscopes over time resulted in revisions to the cell theory? Okay. Um, Improvements means the microscopes are getting better, which means they reveal new information and we can see more in the cell and the cell processes. Has nothing about them being easier to use um, or sharing pictures. It's just new information. Question 20. Which statement best explains why the development of a new area of science can lead to changes in the theory? Okay. So that's the whole idea, that what we're trying to kind of share a little bit here is that as we learn and technology and so forth improves, um, it promotes experimentation and it gives us a different point of view. We're not using the theory as our only point of view, so we get new ideas. Question 21. All right. Alyssa observed a flock of small birds in her yard. Now, you notice as I'm looking at these questions, I jump to the question. That's a little bit of a test taking strategy. Which question is a non scientific question that she might ask about about the birds? Okay. What color are the beaks? Non scientific. Okay. Especially of just the small birds. Everything else is scientific. Does having a bird bath affect the feeding habits? That's a question. At what time of the day? Okay, so this one's the non-scientific question. You got to read them carefully. Examine the following list of questions. All right, which statement correctly identifies the scientific question and describes why this is a scientific question? Why kids are afraid of ghosts is not a scientific question. Should I feed the raccoon that visits my trash can? If you're wanting to make a pet, that might be a good question, but not something that we can measure. How does mouse color affect mouse survival? So, what we're seeing is here's a situation, and then this is the outcome. So, question 3 leads to a hypothesis that could be tested. And then finally, question 23. The Florida Everglades are one of the most diverse ecosystems in the United States. Okay, what question is least likely to be asked based on the results? What results? So it says recently scientists have investigated and determined that the population of pythons, which is a snake, has increased greatly. Okay, so what question is least likely asked based on these results? And we're still looking for, something that goes back to, okay, they studied these pythons in the Everglades. So we know, how can population be controlled? That's a good question. How quickly are they reproducing? That's a good question. How are they affecting other populations? Good question. We're not going to ask, are these pythons a new species? Okay, we're told that. Okay, they're from Asia, so it's kind of, we got to make sure we read these questions very carefully. Take your time, and try to look at how does the question, what's it driving me towards? Okay, so I kind of wanted to go through this. This is the unit test review. And I was encouraging you to take notes on this, and use them on the test. The test is not going to ask you the same question. So jotting down questions and answers is not what we need to look at. What we need to look at in each question is, what concept am I applying? Concepts about knowing what tools are most likely used. That's the kind of helps that you probably should look for on your unit test. Okay, it's application of things that we looked at. All right, so I hope this test will help. or I hope this review helps a little bit. And, hopefully it'll be a big help to you. Okay. All right. So that's it for my little video.